Not no place. Well, everybody knows about Fort Campbell,
Yep.
Fort Hood. They didn't exist back then. We had Fort Bliss, Fort Sam Houston, Fort Benning, Fort Bragg. I put 6 tours of duty at Fort Benning. So what I'm jacking about, tell you, we didn't have no post, camp, or station when I went in.
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking at one now, sir.
Yep.
You're looking at one now that didn't even have basic training.
Oh, really?
It was that far back. Didn't have basic training. I said I do and pledge allegiance and all that. And I was 3 weeks in civilian clothes.
There you go.
So we got some coveralls over at Bowman Field at Fort Knox. I was at Fort Knox, incidentally. That's where we went. You see, back then, we back up a little bit. I try to keep it together. In 1939, on a Friday night, the Army come to town with an old deuce-and-a-half truck with an old floppy top, you've seen them, and a little gun tied behind, which was a 75 pack howitzer. Okay. At that time, like I said, it's very primitive. Just come off of World War I, which has been about 23 or 5 years ago. They give us paperwork. And you had to go in town and get 3 merchants to sign for you.
Mm-hmm.
You get the postmaster to sign for you. You get the chief of police to sign for you. And of course, at 18 years old, which I was, by 17 days, incidentally, my time is 10/1/21. See, that's my birthday. I've done lived through 9 decades. Okay, now, we got our paperwork, and you be here at 4:30, 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Nowadays, they catch bus, delayed in retirement and all that. Have you ever been in GROTC or anything?
No.
You know nothing about it. But
I've heard of it, but I ain't done
You've
nothing.
heard of it. Well, you're looking at a story right now. And we went to Fort Knox and stayed in pyramidal tents. We stayed in pyramidal tents. Mm-hmm. A pyramidal tent is 4 foot square, 14 foot square at the bottom and a foot square at the top, and it holds 3 men in there, 3 cots with a Sibley stove. At this kind of weather, you know, in October it was cold, but anyway, we made it.
Mm-hmm.
But so, as I said, we had no post camp or station. We didn't get our equipment till we went to Fort McClellan, Alabama. That's out of Anderson, Alabama. And we got equipment there, and then on into Louisiana in 1940 was the Louisiana maneuvers. And we went down there and stayed, and then come back. And like I said, I had a phrase called like nomads, you know, like gypsies, and to a certain extent we was.
Yep.
Because we had no post camp or station. And first time I ever seen Fort Benning was 1940, and out there in the Harmon's Church area. Yes, sir. But it was a trial and error method, so to speak. But we made it, and then went on, and then we got our equipment, and back in them days, they'd come and talk to a farmer. If you had a field or a horse lot, we'd pull in there and camp overnight, which is unheard of nowadays. But like I said, it was a very, very primitive situation. And that went on and then of course the draft started, as you know, the early part of 41.
Yeah. That's the year Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Well, Pearl Harbor, the draft started in 41,
Yep.
Early part. And then when the draft started in 41, then that's when everybody got their act together. They was trying to build camp posts or stations. They was having basic training back then. And we was at Camp Bowie, Texas out there, which is unheard of now, which is Brownwood, Texas. That's flat dab in the center of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
That was 1941, I think it was, yeah. And then I come back, and I was at Fort Custer, Michigan, and I was in an artillery outfit, a 155, back them days, heavy artillery. Now it's medium. And of course, them guns is obsolete, of course. Yes, sir.
Mhm.
So and I was there at Fort Custer, Michigan, in 4 foot of snow and 4 below, and I thought I was going to freeze. But anyway, we made it, as all of them did. But the education wasn't level, wasn't much. If you could read and write and spell your name, well, that's fine. We had 4 men in D Battery, 21st Field Artillery, that couldn't sign the name on a payroll. But we went to war with that kind, but they was good. Because we all rode up in the Depression, you see.
Yeah.
In the Depression mode, yes, sir.
So where were you when Pearl Harbor was bombed?
At Fort Custer, Michigan.
At Fort Custer, Michigan?
Yes. I was at Fort Custer, Michigan. Now you jump right in and help me out and help me. That's kind of off the cuff thing.
Yeah.
But of course, 20 years makes a difference. And I was at Fort Custer, Michigan, and then from there we went back out to what we call Fort Hood. Now that is in 40, and 42. I was out there in 42, and then I was back out there, and again in 52. But that comes later. I've made 2 tours out there in Texas. Well, 3 actually, was when in 1941 I was out at Camp Bowie. Okay, now where we're going. In 44, that was before the big invasion of France. You remember them?
Oh, yeah.
June the 6th, 1944, I was at Fort Gordon, Georgia. That's in Georgia, of course, right there in Augusta, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the big assets, of course. By that time, everything had settled down. When the war broke out, everybody went on a basic ration and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Big time. No questions asked. You come out of the classroom, went right in. That's one reason that I wasn't in. Now, I'm not a combat soldier, but I was in a combat unit all these years.
Yeah.
Due to the fact that I was in about 2.5, almost 3 years before the war. And back in them days, they called it cadred out. And back then, they had what they call an MOS, a Military Occupation Specialty. And that's where you went. And you was promoted if you got enough IQ and education for that. And I wound up, and back about 1940, I wasn't, give or take 41 or 2, I wound up a unit supply sergeant. Now that a unit supply sergeant takes care of all the equipment in the outfit, to include back then, I'd have to issue the clothes and everything. That was the supply. You have to, and see, that was called service personnel. Back in World War II, for one, no, it took 6 service personnel, different branches of service, 6 branches of service, to keep one man on the line, which was a combat situation. But I wasn't in there. In 1944, March of 1944, they come out with a directive, parachute outfits. I didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Had no idea. They took us what's supposed to be a little physical, and they run through and just basic. Went through that. So you took 4 weeks of training there at Fort Benning, on the 250-foot towers and all that, and took basic training. And back then, we didn't know it. I didn't know it. March, get the time frame. March of 44, and June the 6th of 44, they put 2 divisions, the 82nd and 101st in France.
Yep.
And I was over there trying to jump off a little old tower over there. Of course, they had the riggers. That's the man that packs the chutes, you know. They called us in there, and we got through, of course, basic training, the 5-mile run for breakfast and all that usual, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It come a long way from 39 since then. And incidentally, they's going to give you $50 a month to jump out of the little airplane. Well, man, where do you want it at? I was ready. They called us in there a big long hangar. You know what? And the first parachute I ever seen, I packed the thing. Of course, I had it in the floor before I even got it undone good. But I packed it. In fact, I went through jump school for 5 jumps and packed our own chutes. That's how primitive it was back then. And I packed my own chute. And the first airplane I seen, of course, I jumped out of the thing. And of course, I stayed with them till, when was this? 1957. About 13 years I stayed on jump status. And you see, incidentally, you have to jump every 3 months to stay on jump status, just like you have flight crews and them things. The same thing at Paraboy. Of course, airborne parachutists now is more or less to a certain extent obsolete. Now you have your special units, you have, of course, the Green Berets, you have the Rangers, you have those people, yes. In 1952, I went from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was in an artillery outfit. Oh yeah, let's try again, a little ahead of myself. The way the Army can downsize, let's try this one. Let's try the Army's downsizing. See, I went to France in January of '45, just after the Bulge, and it was winding down.
That's the last German offensive of the war.
I was standing in a chow line when President Roosevelt, we heard about him. I was in Auxerre, France,
Yeah,
standing
when
in
he
a
died,
chow line. When he died at Warm Springs, Georgia.
Yeah.
And everybody from a top general, which was General Eisenhower, down to the little private, they had one word. Now what? Because Germany was counteroffensive like they did in the Bulge and them, and we wondered who was going to take over. Harry Truman took over, but at that time it was trying time. So I stayed there till August. Here we go. I stayed there till August of '45, and in the meantime, I didn't know I was with the 13th. Where am I at? 13th Airborne Division. This one right here. It's airborne. See.
Really? Nice.
I was with all those outfits. The 11th, 82nd, all that, and that was the last airborne division I was ever with. It didn't last long. It was activated in '44 and deactivated in '45. But I'm trying to give you a time frame. We left Le Havre, France. It took 7 days to cross the Pacific. Back them days, we jumped out of the little airplane, but they didn't have no military air transport command, enough airplanes to haul us around like they do now. And you had to go by boat. And I put about 6 months on sea time and them things. So from Le Havre, France, to Brooklyn Army Terminal in New York, where, see, this division was getting ready to go and invade Japan. But it never happened. And when we got to Brooklyn Army Terminal, I'm talking about downsizing, I still had the keys to the arms room in my pocket. I don't know who unloaded that boat. I don't know what happened to the equipment. When we went through the chow line, a pay line, and they give us travel pay and go that way. And go that way, they had nine separation centers in the United States. And Camp Atterbury up here was one of them. And the only way transportation was from 42 to 45, they did not make automobiles. It was a war cause. They didn't make none. So the only way was hitchhiking, going my way. And I hitchhiked home, and they'd mail me a discharge. And, of course, I looked around, there wasn't nothing to do. And then I went back, re-enlisted in Camp Atterbury, got a delaying route, and went on over to Japan. And I went to Japan, and I stayed there for 3 years over there. One of the longer tours I was ever at. Stabilized. Excuse me. 3 years, I stayed 3 years over there. And then I come back, and then I was with the Ranger Department in '52 to '57, and then I went back to Stuttgart, Germany, and I retired over there. Yeah. That's more or less just hit and miss, but that's basically the way I would. Anybody would be in a combat unit, you'd think you'd go. But due to the fact that I was in them 2 years, back then, like I said, was catered out, you see. We'd go to one place and start another unit.
Yep.
And you see, like I said, when I first went in, well, you didn't go to a basic training camp or nothing like that. You went direct to an outfit, which was D Battery, in my case, D Battery 21st Field out there. Yeah, yeah. I've touched bases with all of it, and they give you see your MOS, military occupation specialist. That's the key right there, and they cut orders on you, just like I went to Japan from Camp Atterbury, Indiana. Where in the world is Morioka, Japan? And the rest of the story on them surface streets from Monterey, California to Yokohama, 15 days. Now that'll kind of get you an IQ real straightened up. And incidentally, on them ships, if you, as you well know, if you don't, the third day out, that's when you get seasick, and it comes up. Yeah, next. But I've been there. What have you got to add?
You pretty much went through it all, pretty much.
But that's pretty much.
Do you remember where you were when the day the atomic bombs were dropped?
Yeah, just what I said. I was between Le Havre, France, and Brooklyn Army Terminal in New York, which was at Fort Hamilton, New York. Yeah. That's where the process is. Incidentally, that's what they called, well, come on, old man, come on. Repo depot. In other words, that was when you go in as an individual and you'd go to a repo depot. That's where your assignment was, get all your assignments. Yeah, it was called repo depot. It was a. But yeah, I was when they told. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know all that. I didn't even know nothing about it till I got home and heard about it. They bombed Japan. They did. See, things like that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting in Fort Custer, Michigan, in 4 foot of snow, like I said, and they bombed Pearl Harbor. Where's that at? Incidentally, I'll give you an old-time phrase. It's called plum nelly. You know what plum nelly is?
Never heard of it.
Well, remember it. Plumb out of the country and nearly out of the world. Plumb out of the country and nearly out of the world. Just like when I was at Fort Benning. I'm not going to get off the color a little bit. I'm supply sergeant in the Ranger Department. The Ranger Department had a supply unit. Am I holding you up or anything?
No.
The Ranger Department had a base camp at Fort Benning. That's me, supply sergeant for the Ranger Department, 5 years. Okay, stay with me. Then they go from there. That's about 2 weeks, I think it was, 2 or 3. And then you go to mountain camp, Dahlonega, Georgia, for the mountain training. You know, rappel and take compass courses and run through the woods and rappel and all that. Come back to Fort Benning, and then you go to Epler Field, which is Eglin Field, Florida, which you all heard of it, you know, down there at well, I can't think of the town right close to it. You know where it is. It's Eglin Field. And they got, in this case, it's Epler Field, and they got the Ranger Department there, and that's where they run through the snow, swamps, and push the gators out of the way and take asthma's course and all that. It's swamp training. Okay. Now I'm in the Benning phase. Okay, here we go. The way it was back then. It's different now. Now, I told you I'd been there 5 years. I had a secretary sitting right over there next to me. Unknowns to me, and this first lieutenant, walked in the door. Sergeant Bell? Yes, sir. I understand you're going to extend, which I did. I re-enlisted and come to Fort Benning in 52, 3 years, and that's 55. I extended, and that's 56, and I was going to extend a year. See, I done had, stay with me, I had 18 years service in. Get a time frame on this. I had 18 years service. I understand you're going to extend another year. I didn't have sense enough to think I was going to re-enlist. That'd put me to 59, which I'd be eligible to retire. Yeah, speaking of retirement, I'll get there in a minute. I'm going to ask you one. Sergeant Bell, yes, sir. You going to extend? Well, I don't think so, sir. You can either re-enlist or get out, but you're not staying here. In other words, that was nice to know after 5 years in that unit, you see. Just like you was in college, or when the dean come in, you need to pack your clothes, Mr. Ramsey, because you're not staying in here. No explanation given. So I went on up to brigade quarters, and I got orders cut for Plum Nelly. Now, where was Plum Nelly at? Stuttgart, Germany, and more or less the central part of Germany. And then, of course, I went back to Fort Hamilton, New York, which I'd been there back in 45. I'd debarked. And back then, here we go aboard ships again, and they stuck me. Of course, I was a sergeant first class.
Mm-hmm.
I was sergeant first class, and we had to go aboard ship before they shipped out the next morning. Reason I'm throwing this little anecdote in there. And they got the front of the ship is the bow and the stern's back here, and they got it broke down in compartments. And the way that back then with ships people, I'll give you a breakdown. They got all these troops in here. Well, they got a section called Quartermaster Corps. Now they in charge of the troops. The Navy mans the guns and runs the ship. That's the way they set up. And the Merchant Marines, they operate and run the ship, keep the old engines running and everything. When you get out in the middle of the pond, well, they got a phrase called point of no return. Now, what's that? That, you got a dead engine, you sure can't go back, and you're at point of no return, you're about halfway across the pond, ocean that is, till they can get the thing patched up and get back to the next port of embarkation. But luckily I made it. Of course, going to Japan, I was lucky enough, I had bunk number 5 wrong, because we had a main steam line, big pressure line, and what they call packing, and what they call flange caps, and the packing in them. It was leaking, and that extreme heat and that cook dripping. Now you sat on the top bunk, and that hot water dripping on you for 15 days, kind of get your attention, kind of like concentration camps and things like that. I had to sleep with a poncho over me. But anyway, we made it. But yeah, I went to Stuttgart, stayed there, and then I come back. Oh yeah, when I left Germany, they done pushed me out of Benning. I'll get there now, I want your IQ on this one. And in November '59, I come back and I thought I had enough time. And of course, right now, by that time, they was nice enough to let me fly back to the States. I'd come up a little bit in time. Most of the time I'd been going on the surface ship. Got back to Fort Cullen, and the way they done back then, in '59, they give what they call packets or archives, that your DD-14, which they're laying back yonder. There's all kinds of them. I should have drove them out. I'll show you some copies of them if you want to see them.
Oh, yeah.
I'll be glad to. They're not classified. Yeah, I can go back. I should have had them out.
We can pause this and you can go back there and do it if you want to.
You what?
We can pause this video and do it if you want to.
Well, it's in the suitcase.
Okay.
I'd bring it out here. Okay, here we go. With Fort Hamilton, New York, and all you bunch of processing too. You're going down there, and they've got your archive bailed, and then went on down the lane. Yeah. I sit down in front of that lady, and I didn't know whether I had it. Now, you understand, 365 days, you've heard that ever since the first grade.
Yep.
Sergeant Bell? Yes, ma'am. I said, oh boy, here it comes. Here it comes. I understand you're going to retire. Yes, ma'am. If I got time. I said, well, yes, sir, you do. Says you've got 20 years, 1 month, and 1 day. Now, you want me to start processing or you want to re-enlist? Ma'am, you start processing. Now, you tell me why in the Army, when you retire, put that in your notes. Why is it? Now, you done a thesis on that. Why does the Army have 360 days for retirement? I don't know.
Me either.
I don't know. That's like that lieutenant walked in down there at Fort Benning. I don't know either. Sergeant Bell, yes, ma'am. You have 20 years, 1 month, and 1 day. It's based on 360 days a year. Now you go figure that out. Talk to some of your classmates.
I will.
And if you can find out I'll give you my phone number. I'd be glad to. I'd like to know it myself. Of course, I've been out some 20 or 30, about 30 years or more. 20, yeah. How long I've done forgot. But anyway, that's more or less mine. Yeah, I'll show you one of them DD 214s. Wait a minute, just a minute.
All right.